7-year-old boy calls 911 to arrest his stepfather after hearing his mother scream. When the police arrives, the sheriff is shocked by the scene he witnessed. Lucas Mitchell lay perfectly still in his bed, his small heart pounding against his dinosaur print pajamas. At 7 years old, he had already mastered the art of listening through walls. The shouting downstairs had started exactly 23 minutes ago. He knew because he'd been watching his digital T-Rex clock, its green numbers casting an eerie glow across his bedroom. "You're being ridiculous, James." His mother's voice carried through the heating vent, a tremor in it that Lucas had learned to recognize over the past few months. It was the same tremor she had when she told him everything was just fine at breakfast, even though her hands shook while pouring his cereal. The old phone, his mother's previous iPhone that she'd given him, for emergencies only, felt heavy under his pillow. Lucas slid his hand beneath the cotton dinosaur-covered pillowcase, his fingers wrapping around the device. He remembered the day she'd given it to him 3 months ago. "Sometimes, sweetie," she had said, her voice steady but her eyes darting toward the door. "Grown-ups need help too. If you ever feel scared, if you ever think mommy needs help, you can use this to call 911. But only in real emergencies. Okay?" A crash from downstairs made him flinch. It sounded like breaking glass, probably another accident that would be cleaned up before breakfast tomorrow, with his stepfather James apologizing and bringing home takeout from their favorite pizza place. "Look what you made me do." James's voice boomed through the house. "Always pushing me, Sarah. Always testing my patience." Lucas closed his eyes, trying to remember what his teacher, Ms. Peterson, had taught them about breathing exercises during their Mindfulness Monday sessions. In through the nose, out through the mouth. But his breath caught in his throat when he heard the sound, that awful sound of flesh meeting flesh that he'd heard twice before. His mother's scream pierced the night. Without hesitation, Lucas pulled out the phone. His hands were trembling so badly that he had to try twice to press the power button. The screen lit up, illuminating his face in the dark room. He could hear heavy footsteps downstairs, his mother's muffled pleading. Another crash. In through the nose, out through the mouth, he whispered to himself, unlocking the phone with shaking fingers. He'd practiced this, hadn't he? Late at night, when everyone was asleep, he'd rehearsed what he would do, what he would say. Just in case. The numbers seemed to swim before his eyes. 911. His finger hovered over the call button as James's voice thundered up the stairs. "Where do you think you're going?" Another scream, closer this time. Running footsteps on the stairs. Lucas pressed call. The phone rang once, his heart threatening to burst from his chest. What if James heard? What if he came upstairs? What if? 911, what's your emergency? The calm, professional voice of a woman filled his ear. Lucas opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. Downstairs, something heavy hit the wall. "Hello? This is 911. Is anyone there?" Lucas swallowed hard, gathering every ounce of courage in his 7-year-old body. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "My mommy needs help. He's hurting her again." There was a brief pause on the other end. "I'm here to help, sweetheart. Can you tell me your name and where you are?" Another crash downstairs. His mother's voice, pleading, "James, please. The neighbors will hear." Lucas clutched the phone tighter, tears rolling down his cheeks. "I'm Lucas. Lucas Mitchell. We live at 1487 Maple Street. Please hurry. My stepdad. He's really angry tonight." "You're very brave, Lucas. I'm sending help right now. Can you find a safe place to hide while we wait for the police?" Lucas's eyes darted to his closet, his usual hiding spot during these episodes. But before he could move, heavy footsteps started ascending the stairs. Each step seemed to shake the entire house. "He's coming upstairs," Lucas whispered into the phone, terror gripping his chest. "He's coming dash," the hallway floorboard creaked. The one right outside his bedroom door. Time seemed to freeze as Lucas stared at his bedroom door, the phone pressed against his ear like a lifeline. The old floorboard outside let out another protesting groan. "Lucas!" The 911 dispatcher's voice was barely audible. "Are you still there, sweetheart?" He couldn't respond. His breath caught in his throat as a shadow passed beneath his door, but it kept moving, accompanied by his mother's voice. "James, please, let's just go back downstairs. We can talk about this." Their footsteps retreated, and Lucas released the breath he'd been holding. "I'm here," he whispered into the phone. He didn't come in. "Good, Lucas. You're doing great. The police are on their way. Can you get to your closet without making any noise?" Lucas slid off his bed, his sock-covered feet silent against the hardwood floor. The dinosaur nightlight cast strange shadows as he crept toward his closet, still clutching the phone. He could hear Sheriff David Anderson's voice crackling through the dispatcher's radio in the background, reporting his position. 5 minutes out from Maple Street, the closet door opened with a slight squeak that made Lucas freeze. But the argument downstairs had grown louder again, masking any sound from his room. He slipped inside, pulling his knees to his chest as he settled between his winter coats and school backpack. "I'm in my closet," he whispered. "Perfect. Lucas, stay there. Can you tell me what's happening now?" Through the closet's slatted doors, Lucas could see his bedroom window. Red and blue lights were starting to reflect off the neighbor's house across the street, but they were still too far away. A sudden crash from downstairs made him jump. His mother's voice, higher now with panic. "No, James, put that down." "Ma'am," Lucas whispered urgently into the phone, remembering how his mother had taught him to be polite even in emergencies. "I think he has something. My mom sounds really scared. The police are almost there, Lucas. Just 2 more minutes. You're being so brave." The sound of breaking glass echoed through the house, followed by his mother's scream. Lucas pressed his hands over his ears, but he couldn't block it out. Tears streamed down his face as he rocked back and forth in the darkness of the closet. "Make it stop," he pleaded into the phone. "Please make it stop." The dispatcher's voice remained steady. "They're turning onto your street now, Lucas. Can you see the lights?" Lucas peered through the slats again. The red and blue lights were closer now, reflecting off the fresh snow that had fallen earlier that evening. He could hear the muffled sound of sirens. Downstairs, the argument suddenly stopped. In the silence, Lucas could hear car doors slamming outside. "He knows they're here," Lucas whispered, his heart pounding. "I can hear him running." Heavy footsteps pounded through the house. The back door slammed. His mother's voice, desperate. "Lucas, Lucas, stay in your room." The front door splintered with a massive crash that shook the entire house. Multiple voices filled the air. "Police! Nobody move!" "Lucas!" The dispatcher's voice was urgent now. "The police are in your house. Stay in your closet until the line went dead." Lucas stared at the phone's black screen in horror. The battery had finally died. Footsteps thundered up the stairs, different from James's. More of them. A deep voice called out, "Clear the upper floor. Find the boy." Lucas pressed himself further into the corner of his closet, surrounded by the familiar smell of his winter coat and school clothes. The bedroom door burst open, and a beam of light swept across the room. "Lucas!" A man's voice, authoritative but gentle. "Lucas Mitchell? This is Sheriff Anderson. You can come out now, son. You're safe." But Lucas couldn't move. His body felt frozen in place as the closet door slowly opened, flooding his hiding spot with light. Through his tears, he saw a tall figure crouching down, badge glinting in the dinosaur nightlight's glow. The sheriff's face, when it came into view, was kind but lined with concern. "Hey there, brave boy," he said softly, holstering his flashlight. "I heard you made a very important phone call tonight." Behind the sheriff, through his bedroom doorway, Lucas could see more officers in the hallway. And then his mother's voice, shaking but alive. "Lucas? Baby, where are you?" But before Lucas could respond, before he could run to his mother's voice, another sound cut through the night. 3 sharp gunshots from somewhere behind the house, followed by screams. Sheriff Anderson's face hardened as he reached for his radio, still keeping his body between Lucas and the door. "Shots fired," he barked into the device. "Officers respond to the rear of the house. Status of the suspect unknown. I repeat, shots fired, Through his bedroom window, Lucas could see more red and blue lights arriving, casting wild shadows across his dinosaur-covered walls. The night, he realized, was far from over. The emergency room at Boston General Hospital buzzed with fluorescent-lit activity at 2 a.m. Lucas sat on the edge of an examination bed, his dinosaur pajamas now covered by a too-large police department sweatshirt. A kind-faced nurse named Jenny was checking the small cut on his arm, a souvenir from when he'd stumbled rushing to his mother after the gunshots. "Just a scratch," Jenny said softly, applying a Band-Aid decorated with cartoon dinosaurs. "You're quite lucky they had these special ones left." But Lucas wasn't paying attention to the Band-Aid. His eyes were fixed on the curtain separating his bay from the one next door, where he could hear his mother's muffled voice talking to the doctors. He'd only caught a glimpse of her when they'd first arrived enough to see the bruising on her face, the way she held her right arm close to her body. Sheriff Anderson stood at the foot of Lucas's bed, his uniform still bearing traces of snow and mud from the chase through their backyard. The lines in his face seemed deeper in the harsh hospital lighting. "You did everything right tonight, son," the sheriff said, his voice gentle but heavy with something Lucas couldn't quite understand. "The shots you heard? That was your stepfather firing at one of my deputies. Nobody was hurt. We got him before he could do any real damage." Lucas nodded, picking at a loose thread on the sweatshirt. "Is he going to come back?" Before the sheriff could answer, the curtain rustled and a tall woman in a dark suit entered. She introduced herself as Detective Sarah Reeves, speaking in the same careful tone adults had been using with Lucas all night. "Lucas, I need to ask you some questions about what happened. Is that okay?" He nodded again, though his hands gripped the edge of the bed tighter. Sheriff Anderson moved closer, a reassuring presence at his side. "Can you tell me about other times? Before tonight?" Detective Reeves asked, pulling out a small notebook. Lucas swallowed hard, looking down at his sock-covered feet. Sometimes James would get angry. He'd break things, make Mom cry." His voice grew smaller. "Last month, he threw Mom's favorite lamp at the wall because dinner was cold." The detective's pen scratched against paper. "Did you ever see him hurt your mom before tonight?" "2 times, Lucas whispered. "But Mom said it was accidents. She said James was just having a hard time at work." He looked up suddenly, eyes wide. "She made me promise not to tell anyone. Am I in trouble?" "No, buddy," Sheriff Anderson interjected quickly. "You're not in trouble at all. You helped your mom tonight. You were very brave." A commotion in the hallway drew their attention. Through the gap in the curtain, Lucas caught sight of his Aunt Emma rushing toward the nurse's station, her long red hair wild and uncombed, still wearing what looked like pajamas under her winter coat. "My sister," she was saying, her voice urgent. "Sarah Mitchell. They brought her in about an hour ago." Moments later, the curtain between the bays was pulled back. Sarah Mitchell sat on the other bed, her face tear-stained but composed. A doctor was finishing up with her arm. Not broken, Lucas would later learn, but badly sprained. "Lucas," she breathed, reaching out her good arm toward him. "Baby, come here." He scrambled off his bed and into her embrace, careful of her injuries. She smelled like hospital antiseptic instead of her usual lavender perfume, but her arms were warm and safe. "I'm so sorry," she whispered into his hair. "I'm so sorry." Aunt Emma joined their embrace, forming a protective circle around Lucas. Over their shoulders, he could see Sheriff Anderson and Detective Reeves exchanging meaningful looks. "Mrs. Mitchell," Detective Reeves said gently, "we need to discuss your options. James made bail 20 minutes ago." The words sent a chill through the room. Sarah's arms tightened around Lucas. "Bail?" Emma's voice was sharp with disbelief. "How can he possibly dash?" "His father," Sarah said quietly. "His father's a retired judge. He has connections." Sheriff Anderson stepped forward, his face grim. "Which is why we need to move quickly. Mrs. Mitchell, you and Lucas can't go back to that house tonight. Do you have somewhere safe to stay?" "They're coming with me," Emma declared, no room for argument in her tone. "I have plenty of space, and I live in a secure building with cameras." Lucas felt his mother nod against his head, but something in the pit of his stomach told him this wasn't over. As if to confirm his fears, a nurse rushed into their bay, her face pale. "Sheriff? There's something you need to see." In the parking lot, Anderson followed her to the window. Even from the bed, Lucas could see the message keyed into the side of his mother's car, illuminated by the parking lot lights. This isn't over. The first light of dawn was just beginning to creep over the horizon, painting the hospital windows in shades of gray and pink. But for Lucas and his mother, the longest night of their lives wasn't over yet. Aunt Emma's apartment on the 11th floor of the Cornerstone building was everything their family home wasn't. Small but cozy, with walls painted in warm yellows and filled with the scent of cinnamon from her constant baking. For Lucas, who had spent the past week sleeping on a pull-out couch in the living room, it felt like a fortress high above the city. "Hot chocolate?" Emma asked, already reaching for the good cocoa powder, the kind with tiny marshmallows mixed in. Lucas nodded from his perch by the window, where he'd stationed himself every afternoon after school. From here, he could see 6 blocks in every direction. The sound of a key in the front door made him tense, but it was just his mother returning from her meeting with the lawyer. Sarah looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes partially hidden by makeup that couldn't quite conceal the fading bruises. "How did it go?" Emma asked softly, sliding a mug of hot chocolate toward Lucas. Sarah sank into the armchair, her hands shaking slightly as she removed her scarf. "The restraining order is in place, but..." She glanced at Lucas, then back to her sister. "Maybe we should discuss this later." "Mom," Lucas said, his voice stronger than he felt, "I'm not a baby. I want to know." Sarah and Emma exchanged looks. Finally, Sarah nodded. "You're right, sweetheart. You've been so brave through all of this. James's lawyer is..." They're trying to say it was a misunderstanding, that he was defending himself from the police. But that's not true. Lucas protested, hot chocolate forgotten. "He was hurting you. I heard everything." "I know, baby. And the police have your statement and the 911 call. Sheriff Anderson is making sure dash." A knock at the door cut her off. All 3 of them froze. Emma moved first, approaching the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "Sheriff Anderson, ma'am, and Detective Reeves." The tension in the room eased slightly, but didn't disappear completely. Emma checked the peephole before opening the door, revealing the 2 officers in plain clothes. "Mrs. Mitchell," Anderson said, his face grave. "We need to talk about James's court appearance tomorrow. There's been a development." Detective Reeves moved to the window, scanning the street below. "Your husband's father, Judge Cooper, has been making calls. He's trying to get the charges reduced." "Reduced?" Emma's voice rose. "He shot at police officers. After assaulting my mom," Lucas added, his small voice fierce. Anderson knelt down to Lucas's level. "You're absolutely right, son. And that's why we're here. We need to talk about tomorrow. The prosecutor wants Lucas to speak to the judge." Sarah stood up so quickly she knocked over her purse. "No, absolutely not. He's been through enough." "Sarah," Detective Reeves said gently, "Lucas's testimony could be crucial. Judge Martinez needs to understand the pattern of behavior, and Lucas has been witness to dash." A sharp rapping sound from the kitchen window made everyone jump. A branch, blown by the wind, had struck the glass. But Lucas noticed how quickly both officers had reached for their weapons, how his mother's face had gone pale. "There's something else," Anderson said after a moment. "James's previous marriage. We found some concerning information. His ex-wife had a son, about Lucas's age at the time." The room seemed to grow colder. Sarah sank back into her chair. "What about them?" "They moved to Arizona 6 years ago, after filing multiple domestic violence reports that were mysteriously dropped." Detective Reeves pulled out her notebook. "We've been trying to contact them, but dash," she was interrupted by Lucas's shout. "Mom!" The parking lot. Everyone rushed to the window. 11 floors below, a familiar black SUV was circling the building's parking lot. Even from this height, Lucas could make out James's silhouette behind the wheel. "He's not supposed to be here," Sarah whispered, clutching Lucas close. "The restraining order." "I'll call it in," Anderson said, already reaching for his radio. But before he could, the SUV stopped. James stepped out, looking directly up at their window. In his hand was something that caught the late afternoon sun with a metallic glint. Detective Reeves was already running for the door, gun drawn. "All units, respond to Cornerstone Building. Suspect James Cooper in violation of restraining order, potentially armed." Lucas couldn't tear his eyes away from the scene below. James was still staring up at their window, and even from 11 floors up, Lucas could see the smile spreading across his stepfather's face. It was the same smile he used to give before things would start breaking at home. The sound of approaching sirens filled the air, but James didn't move. He simply raised his hand, the metal object glinting again, and pointed it directly at their window. Tuesday morning dawned cold and gray at Boston General Children's Hospital. Lucas sat in Dr. Rachel Martinez's cheerfully decorated office, his legs dangling from an oversized armchair, staring at the fish tank that bubbled quietly in the corner. "Would you like to draw today?" Dr. Martinez asked, sliding a fresh sheet of paper and a box of colored pencils across her desk. She was younger than Lucas had expected a child psychologist to be, with kind eyes and a streak of blue in her dark hair that reminded him of the tropical fish swimming lazy circles behind her. The events from yesterday evening still played through his mind. James pointing something at their window, it turned out to be just his phone. Though the police had taken his violation of the restraining order seriously, the chaos of police cars flooding the parking lot, and James's laughter as they led him away. "Again. He keeps coming back," Lucas said quietly, selecting a black pencil. "Like a shadow." Dr. Martinez nodded, making a small note on her pad. "That must be scary." "Not for me," Lucas said, starting to draw. Dark lines began to form on the paper. "I'm scared for Mom. She pretends she's okay, but I hear her crying at night when she thinks I'm asleep." The pencil moved faster now, creating the outline of a house. Their house. "She jumps every time the phone rings. And yesterday at school, I saw a car that looked like his, and I couldn't breathe right. Ms. Peterson had to help me do the special breathing exercises again. Those panic attacks are normal after what you've been through," Dr. Martinez assured him. "Would you tell me about your drawing?" Lucas added more details. "Darkened windows, storm clouds overhead. It's our old house. I dream about it sometimes. In the dreams, I'm trying to call 911 again, but the phone doesn't work. Or I dial the numbers wrong. Or," he switched to a red pencil, "or I'm too late." A knock at the office door made them both look up. Dr. Martinez checked her watch and frowned. They still had 20 minutes left in their session. "Come in," she called. Sheriff Anderson stepped into the room, still in uniform, his face tight with concern. "Sorry to interrupt. Document Mrs. Mitchell asked me to check in. There's been another incident." Lucas's hand tightened around the red pencil until his knuckles went white. "What did he do?" Anderson sat in the chair next to Lucas, his bulk making the furniture seem even more child-sized. "Someone broke into your old house last night. Your mom's been staying with your aunt, so the house was empty. But what?" Lucas could feel his heart starting to race again. "They went into your room, son. Only your room." The red pencil snapped in Lucas's grip. Dr. Martinez leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "What was taken, Sheriff?" His clothes were scattered around, books thrown off shelves. But the only thing missing was... Anderson hesitated, looking at Lucas with sympathy. "Your dinosaur collection. All of them. The stuffed ones, the plastic toys, even the nightlight." Lucas felt the room spin slightly. Those dinosaurs had been his constant companions, especially during the bad nights. Some had been gifts from his real dad, before the cancer took him. Others were from his mom, given on birthdays and Christmases when money was tight but she'd saved up anyway. "We can't prove it was James," Anderson continued. "No fingerprints, no witnesses. But it was him," Lucas interrupted, his voice hollow. "He always said they were baby toys. That I needed to grow up and stop being scared." His hands were shaking now. He said real men aren't afraid of anything. Dr. Martinez moved around her desk, crouching beside Lucas's chair. Being afraid doesn't make you weak, Lucas. Being brave means doing the right thing even when you are afraid. Like you did when you called 911. The police are watching your aunt's building, Anderson added. And we've increased patrols around your school. He won't get near you again. But Lucas barely heard him. His eyes were fixed on his unfinished drawing, the dark house, the storm clouds, the red streaks that looked too much like the lights from police cars. In the margins, almost without realizing it, he'd drawn tiny dinosaurs. They were hiding in the shadows of the house, watching, waiting, just like he had done, just like he was still doing. A sudden blast of car horn from the street below made him jump. Dr. Martinez moved to the window, peering down at the hospital parking lot. Her sharp intake of breath drew Anderson to his feet. "What is it?" the sheriff demanded, joining her at the window. "A black SUV," she said quietly. "It just drove through the lot." Slowly, Lucas didn't need to look. He knew who it was, knew what it meant. James was sending a message. "I'm watching too." The session ended early, with Anderson escorting Lucas through the hospital's back entrance to where his mother waited in Aunt Emma's car. As they pulled away, Lucas caught a glimpse of something in the hospital's flower bed near the entrance. A small plastic T-Rex, one from his collection, positioned to face the door. Waiting, watching. The shadows were growing longer, and Lucas knew. The real storm hadn't even begun. The courthouse loomed over them like a stone giant, its granite steps slick with early morning frost. Lucas clutched his mother's hand as they climbed, surrounded by a protective circle of police officers. 2 weeks had passed since the dinosaur incident, and today was James's preliminary hearing. "Remember," Detective Reeves said quietly, walking beside them, "you only have to tell Judge Martinez what you saw and heard, just like we practiced." Lucas nodded, adjusting the too-tight collar of his dress shirt, the only one he had at Aunt Emma's apartment. His mother had wanted to go back to their house to get his better clothes, but the police had advised against it. More dinosaurs had appeared over the past 2 weeks. On his school playground, outside Emma's building, even in his mother's hospital locker. The courthouse lobby buzzed with morning activity. Lucas caught snippets of conversation that stopped abruptly as they passed, felt the weight of strangers' stares. His mother's hand tightened around his. "Sarah." The voice cut through the ambient noise like a knife. James stood near the courtroom doors with his lawyer and his father, Judge Cooper, a tall man with steel-gray hair and cold eyes. James looked different in his suit and tie, clean-shaven, almost like the man who had first started dating his mother 2 years ago. Almost. "You can't approach them." Detective Reeves stepped forward, one hand raised. "The restraining order doesn't apply inside the courthouse," James's lawyer interjected smoothly. "My client has every right to " "Hello, Lucas." James's voice was soft, almost gentle. The same voice he'd used when he first moved in, when he'd promised to be the best stepfather ever. "I missed you, buddy. Did you get my presents?" Lucas felt his mother tremble beside him. Sheriff Anderson moved between them and James, his hand resting casually near his weapon. "That's enough, Cooper. I was just being nice," James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Making sure my stepson knows I'm thinking about him. About both of them." "All parties for Cooper versus the Commonwealth," a bailiff called out, opening the courtroom doors. They filed in, the tension crackling like static electricity. Lucas and his mother sat in the front row with Detective Reeves, while James and his team took their place at the defense table. Judge Martinez, a stern-looking woman with silver-streaked black hair, entered, and the proceedings began. The prosecutor presented the charges: domestic violence, assault with a deadly weapon, resisting arrest, violation of a restraining order. James sat calmly through it all, occasionally turning to smile at Lucas and Sarah. Then came the evidence. The 911 call recording filled the courtroom, Lucas's small, terrified voice making his mother cry silently beside him. Photos of her injuries. Police body cam footage of James firing at officers. The Commonwealth calls Lucas Mitchell to the stand, Lucas stood on shaking legs. As he passed the defense table, James reached out suddenly, his fingers brushing Lucas's sleeve. "Good luck, son." Everything happened at once. Sarah screamed. Anderson lunged forward. The bailiff moved to intercept. And Lucas felt something small and hard pressed into his palm during that brief contact. He opened his hand as he reached the witness stand. It was a small plastic dinosaur, one from his collection. But this one had been modified. Its tiny plastic claws had been sharpened to needle points. Its eyes colored blood red with marker. Lucas looked up at James, who was still smiling that empty smile. And in that moment, something inside Lucas, something that had been bending and stretching for months, finally snapped. "He did it on purpose," Lucas shouted, holding up the dinosaur. "He's been leaving them everywhere. He's trying to scare us. He hurt my mom, and now he's trying to hurt me and Dash." "Order." Judge Martinez banged her gavel. "Bailiff, approach the witness." Dash, but Lucas wasn't finished. 2 years of fear and silence came pouring out. "He said he'd kill her if I ever told. He said no one would believe us. He breaks things and then says it's mom's fault. He Dash." James stood up suddenly, his face transforming. "You little liar." "Sarah, control your brat before I Dash." The mask had slipped. In front of the judge, the lawyers, everyone, James Cooper showed his true face. The courtroom erupted into chaos. James vaulted over the defense table, reaching for Lucas. Sheriff Anderson tackled him mid-leap. Sarah ran to the witness stand, wrapping Lucas in her arms. Judge Martinez was shouting for order. And through it all, Lucas held onto that twisted dinosaur toy, physical proof of the monster who had invaded their lives. As officers wrestled James to the ground, he kept screaming, "You're dead. Both of you. You hear me? This isn't over." But looking down at his stepfather handcuffed on the courtroom floor, Lucas finally understood something. It was over. The breaking point had come at last. The sunlight streamed through the high windows of Dr. Martinez's office, casting long shadows across her desk where an array of Lucas's drawings lay spread out. 3 weeks had passed since the courthouse incident, and each drawing told part of the story. "Your artwork has changed," Dr. Martinez observed, holding up his latest piece. No longer dark houses and storm clouds, but a garden. In the center stood 3 figures: Lucas, his mother, and Sheriff Anderson, who had become a frequent visitor at Aunt Emma's apartment. "Mom's different too," Lucas said, adding color to a new drawing. "She laughs more now. Real laughs, not the pretend ones." Dr. Martinez nodded, making notes in her ever-present pad. "And the nightmares? Still come sometimes." Lucas paused, choosing his words carefully. "But now I know they're just dreams. James can't hurt us anymore." The preliminary hearing had turned into an immediate arrest when James violated the restraining order in front of the entire court. His father's influence couldn't help him this time. Not with dozens of witnesses, including a judge, who had seen his true nature emerge. But that wasn't the only consequence of that day. Sheriff Anderson said they found more evidence in our old house. Lucas continued, switching to a blue pencil. "Hidden cameras. In the walls. James was watching us even before." Even before that night, the discovery had led to additional charges, and more importantly, had prompted James's ex-wife in Arizona to finally come forward. Her testimony, along with her son's, had painted a pattern of behavior that stretched back years. "Does that make you angry?" Dr. Martinez asked gently. Knowing he was watching, Lucas considered this, adding details to his drawing, a butterfly garden, like the one Sheriff Anderson had helped them plant at their new apartment complex across town. "Not anymore, because we were watching too. Mom was watching for signs of his anger. I was watching for ways to help her. And now the police are watching him." A knock at the door announced the end of their session. Sarah entered, looking years younger than she had just a month ago. The bruises had faded, but more importantly, the fear in her eyes had diminished. "Ready for lunch, sweetheart?" she asked Lucas. "Emma's trying a new recipe she found online. Something with dinosaur-shaped chicken nuggets." Lucas smiled, gathering his art supplies. The mention of dinosaurs no longer sent chills down his spine. They were just toys again, not weapons of fear. As they prepared to leave, Dr. Martinez held up the garden drawing. "May I keep this one? For my wall?" Lucas nodded, then hesitated. "Can I add one more thing?" He took the drawing back and carefully added a final detail. A small security camera mounted on the garden wall, its lens watching over the peaceful scene. Below it, he wrote in careful letters, "Sometimes watching isn't scary. Sometimes it keeps you safe. That's beautiful, Lucas." His mother said softly, tears in her eyes. As they walked to the car, Lucas noticed a police cruiser parked across the street, one of the regular patrols that still monitored their movements. But instead of feeling afraid, he felt protected. Watched over, not watched. Their new apartment building came into view as they drove home. Its modern security systems and friendly doorman, a far cry from their old house on Maple Street. In the garden they'd planted, tiny green shoots were just beginning to emerge from the soil. Lucas pressed his face against the car window, watching the city scroll past. In the reflection, he could see his mother's smile, real, unafraid, healing. They were both healing. But as they turned the final corner, Lucas caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. A black SUV, different from James's but similar enough, idling at the curb near their building. And suddenly he remembered James's last words in the courtroom. "This isn't over." Was it really over? Or was this just the calm before another storm? The black SUV turned out to belong to Michelle Cooper, James's first wife, who had flown in from Arizona with her son Tyler for the upcoming trial. Lucas watched from the lobby as Sheriff Anderson greeted them, noticing how Tyler, now 13, flinched when the automatic doors closed too loudly behind them. "He's just like you described," Michelle was saying to Sarah, her voice soft but steady. "James? He always targeted the gentle ones first." Tyler stood slightly apart from the group, his lanky frame hunched as if trying to disappear. Lucas approached him carefully, the way he'd learned to approach scared animals at the shelter where Aunt Emma volunteered. "I have games upstairs," Lucas offered. "And Mom made cookies." Tyler's eyes darted to his mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Go ahead, honey. We need to talk to the prosecutors anyway." In Lucas's temporary bedroom at Aunt Emma's, Tyler gradually began to relax. As they played Mario Kart, stories started spilling out, stories that echoed Lucas's own experiences with frightening familiarity. "He took my baseball cards," Tyler said quietly during a race. "Said I loved them more than him. Said I needed to learn about priorities." He gripped the controller tighter. Then he started with the cameras. Lucas paused the game. "In the walls?" Tyler nodded. "Mom found one in my bathroom. That's when we finally ran. But he followed us to Phoenix. Kept showing up at my school, my baseball games. Left gifts. Dinosaurs for me," Lucas said. "Baseball cards for you?" "Yeah." "But he'd written things on them. Threats. Promises." Tyler's voice cracked. "Nobody believed us. His dad, the judge, he made everything go away. Until now." Down the hall, they could hear the adults talking in low, urgent voices. Words like pattern of behavior and additional charges drifted through the walls. "Did you know," Tyler asked suddenly, "that he did this before us? There was another family in Connecticut. A mom and 2 kids. They disappeared one day. Just vanished." Lucas felt his stomach drop. "Did he?" "No one could prove anything. But after I saw what he did to your mom on the news, I found their old social media. The mom posted about missing toys before they disappeared. Just like us." A knock at the bedroom door made them both jump. Detective Reeves entered, her face grim. "Boys, we need to talk." James escaped custody during transport to the county jail. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Lucas heard his mother's sharp intake of breath from the hallway, saw Tyler's face go pale. "He had help," Reeves continued. "His father, Judge Cooper, was arrested an hour ago. He orchestrated the whole thing. But James is out there, and we have reason to believe She was cut off by the building's fire alarm blaring to life. Through the window, Lucas could see people evacuating onto the street below. And there, across the road, a familiar figure stood watching. James had shed his prison jumpsuit for civilian clothes, but his smile, that empty, terrifying smile, was the same as ever. "Get down!" Reeves shouted, drawing her weapon as the first gunshot shattered the window. In the chaos that followed, as SWAT teams surrounded the building and helicopters thundered overhead, Lucas found himself huddled in the bathroom with Tyler, listening to the chaos outside. Both boys recognized the familiar sound of James's laughter echoing up from the street. "He won't stop," Tyler whispered. "He never stops." But Lucas, clutching his mother's old emergency phone, now with a new battery and number, felt something different this time. Not fear, but determination. "No," he said, dialing 911 for the second time in his young life. "But this time there are too many of us. Too many witnesses. Too many voices." The dispatcher's voice came through clear and strong. 911, what's your emergency?" Lucas took a deep breath, hearing the echo of sirens approaching. "He's back. And this time we're ready for him." The next hours unfolded like scenes from a movie, but there was nothing entertaining about the real fear that permeated Aunt Emma's apartment building. SWAT teams had evacuated most residents, but Lucas, Tyler, their mothers, and the officers remained trapped on the 11th floor. James had somehow managed to block the main stairwell with a small fire, and he controlled the view of the emergency exit. "He's playing with us," Michelle whispered, her arms wrapped protectively around Tyler, like he always did, making it into a game. Sarah sat between Lucas and the window, though the SWAT team had moved them all into the hallway away from any potential line of fire. Sheriff Anderson crouched nearby, his radio crackling with updates. "Team 2 in position," a voice reported. "Target still visible on Morton Street. He's just standing there, Sheriff. Smiling." "He's waiting for something," Tyler said suddenly, his voice stronger than it had been all day. "This is like Phoenix. He always waits until the building's lights went out. Power's cut," someone shouted from down the hall. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow through the corridor. The cameras, Lucas realized, remembering how James had always been obsessed with watching, with control. The building's security cameras would have gone dark. Sheriff Anderson immediately began barking orders into his radio, but Lucas was already moving. He darted away from his mother's grasp and ran toward Aunt Emma's apartment. "Lucas, no!" Sarah called after him, but he had to get something. Had to prove what he knew. He reached Emma's desk just as the first heavy footsteps sounded on the fire escape. Lucas grabbed what he needed and ran back to the group, where officers were now positioning themselves at both ends of the hallway. "He disabled the cameras because he doesn't want to be watched," Lucas explained breathlessly, holding up Aunt Emma's old digital camera. "He only likes it when he's the one doing the watching." Tyler caught on immediately. "That's why he ran in Phoenix. Mom started recording everything he did." A window shattered somewhere down the hall. James's voice, eerily calm, floated through the darkness. "Hide and seek, boys? Just like old times?" But Lucas stood his ground, camera raised. The first flash illuminated James in the emergency exit doorway, catching his expression of surprise. "No more hiding," Lucas said, taking another photo as James raised his gun. "No more secrets." The next few moments exploded in chaos. James lunged forward just as SWAT teams burst through both ends of the hallway. Lucas kept taking photos, flash after flash, each one freezing a fragment of James's final unraveling. The last photo would later become crucial evidence in court. James Cooper, his face contorted in rage, being tackled by Sheriff Anderson as his weapon clattered to the floor. In the background, visible through a broken window, news helicopters illuminated the scene with powerful spotlights. The man who had terrorized them through watching was finally the one being watched. By everyone. As officers led James away in handcuffs, he turned back one last time. But Lucas noticed something different in his stepfather's eyes now. "Fear. You did it," Tyler said quietly, standing beside Lucas as they watched James being loaded into a police van 11 floors below. "You broke his power." Sarah wrapped her arms around both boys, and Lucas felt his mother's tears falling into his hair. But they were different tears now. Tears of relief. of ending, of freedom. The night wasn't over. There would be statements to give, evidence to process, a trial to face. But as Lucas looked at the camera in his hands, at the proof of James's final defeat, he knew one thing for certain. The shadows couldn't hurt them anymore. Not when they had finally stepped into the light. 1 year later, the community garden behind the Healing Heart Center bloomed with early summer flowers. Lucas, now 8, carefully watered the dinosaur-shaped garden bed he'd helped design, part of the center's therapy program for children affected by domestic violence. "Looking good, buddy," Sheriff Anderson said, approaching with 2 cups of lemonade. He was off duty, as he often was when he visited the center. Over the past year, he'd become something of a mentor to Lucas, teaching him about police work, justice, and most importantly, healing. "Tyler's coming to visit next week," Lucas announced, accepting the lemonade. His baseball team made it to regionals in Boston. "I heard," Anderson smiled. "Your mom and Michelle have been planning the celebration dinner for days." The mention of his mother made Lucas glance toward the center's main building, where Sarah now worked as a victim advocate, helping other families escape situations like the one they'd survived. She was stronger now, her laughter came easier, and the shadows rarely crossed her face anymore. James's trial had ended 6 months ago with multiple life sentences. Not just for what he'd done to Lucas's family and Tyler's, but also for the family in Connecticut. They had been found alive, hidden in Arizona, and their testimony had been the final nail in James's coffin. His father, Judge Cooper, would spend his remaining years in federal prison for obstruction of justice and aiding an escape. "Sheriff?" Lucas asked, setting down his watering can. "Do you think he'll ever get out?" Anderson's face turned serious. "No, son. He won't. The evidence you collected with that camera, combined with Tyler's testimony and the other families. He's never hurting anyone again." Lucas nodded, kneeling to pull a weed from around his plants. Among the flowers, small plastic dinosaurs stood guard. Not the ones from his old collection, but new ones. Happy ones. Protected ones. "Someone new moved into our old house on Maple Street," he said conversationally. "A family with kids. I saw them yesterday when we drove past. And how did that make you feel?" Lucas considered this, remembering the young girl playing on the front lawn, her father pushing her on a swing set where his old dinosaur-themed swing used to be. "Good," he decided. "The house feels happy now. The shadows are gone." Sarah emerged from the center, waving as she approached. She looked beautiful in her summer dress, her face bright with purpose. Behind her walked Dr. Martinez, who still saw Lucas weekly, though now their sessions focused more on growth than trauma. "Ready for the support group, sweetheart?" Sarah asked. Lucas had recently started sharing his story with other kids at the center, helping them find their own courage. "Almost," he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out his mother's old iPhone, the one he'd used to make that life-changing 911 call. It was deactivated now, more of a memoir than a device. He placed it carefully among the dinosaurs in the garden. "What are you doing?" Anderson asked curiously. "Planting it," Lucas explained. "Like a seed. Maybe it'll grow into something that helps other kids be brave." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she hugged him. Dr. Martinez made a note on her ever-present pad, smiling. Later that evening, as Lucas got ready for bed in their new home, a warm, secure apartment filled with family photos and children's artwork, he paused at his window. The city lights twinkled beyond, and somewhere out there, other children might be facing their own shadows. But he knew now that shadows couldn't survive in the light. All it took was one small voice, one moment of courage, one call for help to start breaking the darkness. On his bedside table, next to a photo of him with his mother, Tyler, and Sheriff Anderson at the courthouse, sat a single plastic dinosaur. Not a weapon, not a threat, just a toy. Just as it should be. Lucas climbed into bed, no longer needing to check his closet or under the bed. No longer listening for footsteps or breaking glass. The night was quiet, peaceful, safe, and somewhere in a community garden, among the flowers and hope growing in a dinosaur-shaped bed, an old iPhone lay buried like a time capsule, a reminder that even the smallest among us can roar loud enough to shake the world. 7-year-old girl refuses to get into her uncle's car, saying, "Don't leave me alone with him." When her father finds out the reason, he calls the police immediately. The autumn sunlight streamed through the tall windows of Millbrook Elementary's art room, casting long shadows across Sophie Anderson's desk as she carefully selected another blue-colored pencil from her case. At 7 years old, she had already developed what Mrs. Reynolds called an exceptional eye for detail, though Sophie wasn't quite sure what that meant. She just knew that she liked making things look exactly right. "That's a beautiful sky, Sophie," Mrs. Reynolds said, pausing behind her chair. "But it looks a little stormy for a family portrait, don't you think?" Sophie glanced up at her art teacher, then back at her drawing. She hadn't meant to make the sky dark, but somehow the blue had gotten deeper and deeper as she'd worked on it. The figures stood in a neat row, Daddy, Mommy, herself in the middle, and at the edge of the paper, slightly apart from the others, Uncle Derek. "It's not stormy," Sophie said quietly, reaching for the black pencil. "It's just getting late." Mrs. Reynolds watched as Sophie began carefully darkening Uncle Derek's shirt. The child's usual light, quick strokes had been replaced by something heavier, more deliberate. She'd been teaching elementary school art for 15 years, long enough to know when a child's artwork was trying to say something their words couldn't. "Would you like to tell me about your family, Sophie?" Mrs. Reynolds asked, pulling up a small chair. Sophie continued coloring, her small hand gripping the pencil tightly. "That's Daddy. He teaches big kids at the high school. And Mommy works at the hospital with computers." She pointed to each figure with the eraser end of her pencil. "And that's me. And who's this?" Mrs. Reynolds gestured to the slightly separated figure. "Uncle Derek. He just moved back home. Mommy says we have to make him feel welcome because he's been away for a long time." Sophie put down her black pencil and reached for the brown, beginning to color the ground beneath their feet. "He comes to dinner every Sunday now." The bell rang, startling them both. Sophie quickly began gathering her art supplies, tucking each pencil carefully into its designated spot in the case her father had given her for her birthday. It was organized by color, just the way she liked it. "Would you like to finish this tomorrow?" Mrs. Reynolds asked, holding up the drawing. Sophie shook her head. "I'm done," she said, pushing back her chair. "Can I take it home?" "Of course, sweetheart. Your father's picking you up today, right?" Sophie nodded, her face brightening. "It's Wednesday. We get ice cream on Wednesdays." The walk to the parent pickup area was short, but Sophie found herself walking more slowly than usual, her mind on the drawing rolled up in her hand. She hadn't meant to make Uncle Derek stand so far away from everyone else. It had just happened that way, like the dark sky. James Anderson was waiting by his car, his tie slightly loosened after a day of teaching history to teenagers. His face broke into a warm smile when he saw his daughter, and Sophie felt herself relaxing, the tension she hadn't realized she'd been carrying melting away. "There's my artist," he called out, kneeling down to her level. "How was your day, Soph?" Sophie wrapped her arms around his neck, breathing in the familiar scent of coffee and the peppermints he always kept in his pocket. "Good. I made a picture. Can I see it?" Sophie hesitated, then handed over the rolled paper. She watched her father's face carefully as he opened it, studying his expression the way she studied her colored pencils when choosing exactly the right shade. "This is beautiful, sweetheart," James said, but something in his voice had changed, though everyone looks a bit serious. "Was this from last Sunday's dinner?" Sophie nodded, scuffing her shoe against the pavement. "Can we get chocolate ice cream today?" James rolled the drawing back up carefully, tucking it into his messenger bag. "Of course we can. Hop in, artist." As they drove to their favorite ice cream shop, James glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror. She was unusually quiet, watching the trees pass by outside her window. The drawing nagged at him. Something about the composition, the dark colors, the way his brother-in-law stood apart from the family unit. But Rachel had been so happy to have her brother back in town, and Sophie had seemed to enjoy his attention at family gatherings. "Daddy?" Sophie's voice was small in the back seat. "Yes, sweetheart. Do we have to go to dinner on Sunday?" James frowned slightly, turning into the ice cream shop's parking lot. "Don't you want to see everyone? Aunt Linda will be there." "She's feeling much better now." Sophie was quiet for a moment, fiddling with her seatbelt. "I guess so." As they walked into the shop, the cheerful bell above the door ringing, James felt a familiar surge of protectiveness. Sophie's hand was warm in his, and he gave it a gentle squeeze. She'd been more withdrawn lately, less eager to share stories about her day. He'd mentioned it to Rachel, but she'd assured him it was normal, just a phase. She'd said, "Probably adjusting to second grade." "2 scoops of chocolate?" he asked, and Sophie nodded, but her usual excitement was muted. They sat at their regular table by the window, Sophie methodically eating her ice cream while James tried to draw her into conversation about school. She answered his questions politely but briefly, her eyes often drifting to the window, watching cars pass by on the street outside. "Sophie," James said gently, "you know you can tell me anything, right? If something's bothering you, or if you're worried about something." Sophie looked at him then, really looked at him, her brown eyes serious in her small face. For a moment, James thought she was going to say something important. But then the bell above the door chimed again, and she turned back to her ice cream. "I know, Daddy," she said quietly. "Can we go home now? I have homework." As they drove home, James couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The drawing in his bag seemed to weigh heavily, like a message he couldn't quite decode. But Sophie was safe, he told himself. She was surrounded by family who loved her, including her uncle who was trying so hard to make up for lost time. Still, when they pulled into their driveway and Sophie immediately ran up to her room instead of stopping to say hello to Rachel in the kitchen, James felt a familiar knot of worry tighten in his stomach. He took the drawing from his bag, intending to show it to his wife, but something stopped him. Instead, he carefully tucked it into his desk drawer, next to Sophie's other artwork from the past few weeks, all of them darker, somehow, than they used to be. The sound of Rachel's laugh drifted up from the kitchen, probably talking to Derek on the phone about Sunday dinner plans. James closed the drawer slowly, the quiet click of the latch echoing in the growing shadows of his home office. Something was changing in his daughter, in his home, but he couldn't put his finger on what it was. Not yet. When James entered the kitchen that evening, Rachel was still on the phone, her free hand absently stirring a pot of pasta sauce. Her dark hair was pulled back in a messy bun, stray strands escaping around her face as she laughed at something her brother was saying. "Yes, Derek, of course you can bring the dessert on Sunday," she said, shooting James a warm smile as he came in. "You know how Sophie loves your chocolate cake." "Oh wait, here's James. Do you want to say hello?" Before James could respond, she was holding out the phone. He took it reluctantly, forcing cheerfulness into his voice. "Hey, Derek." "James. How's my favorite brother-in-law?" Derek's voice was warm, enthusiastic. "How's Sophie doing? I missed seeing her at Linda's hospital room yesterday." "She's good," James replied, watching Rachel taste the sauce. "Just busy with school. You know how it is." "Listen, I was thinking of stopping by her art class sometime this week," Derek said. "Linda's still pretty weak, and I have some free time. Maybe surprise Sophie. Take her for ice cream." Something in James's chest tightened. "Oh, that's nice of you to offer, but we have our routine. Wednesday is our ice cream day." Right, of course." Derek's laugh was easy, unbothered. "Well, maybe another time. You know, I just want to be more involved in her life. Make up for all those years I missed." James made non-committal sounds until the conversation ended, handing the phone back to Rachel. She ended the call and turned to him, her expression softening with concern. "You okay? You seem tense." "I'm fine," James said, reaching for plates to set the table. "Sophie's been quiet today." Rachel stirred the sauce again, adding a pinch of oregano. "She's probably just tired. Second grade is a big adjustment." She paused, looking at him carefully. "Derek said he offered to help with pickups while Linda's recovering. That would be helpful, wouldn't it? With your afternoon faculty meetings?" "We're managing fine," James said, perhaps too quickly. Rachel's eyebrows rose slightly. "James, he's trying. You know how much it means to me having him back home." She turned off the stove, moving the pot to a cool burner. After everything he went through with Linda's cancer scare last year, moving back here, he just wants to be part of the family again. James began setting out forks with careful precision. I know. It's just... Sophie made this drawing today. Sophie. Dinner time. Rachel called up the stairs, cutting him off. She turned back to James, her voice lower. Please don't start analyzing every little thing. You'll make her self-conscious about her art. Sophie came down slowly, her footsteps heavy on the stairs. She changed into her favorite pajamas, the ones with little paint palettes all over them. Her face brightened slightly at the smell of pasta sauce, her favorite, but she sat quietly as Rachel served her portion. Guess what? Rachel said brightly, sitting down. Uncle Derek's making his special chocolate cake for Sunday dinner. Sophie's fork paused halfway to her mouth. James watched as she carefully set it back down, her small fingers arranging it precisely parallel to her plate. I don't want cake, she said quietly. Rachel laughed. Since when? You always love Uncle Derek's cake. I'm not hungry. Sophie pushed her plate away slightly. Can I go back upstairs? Sophie, Rachel's voice took on an edge of concern. You need to eat something. Are you feeling sick? James watched as Sophie seemed to curl in on herself, becoming smaller in her chair. Maybe just a few bites, sweetheart, he suggested gently. You'll feel better with something in your stomach. Sophie picked up her fork again, taking tiny bites while Rachel chatted about her day at the hospital. James noticed how his daughter's eyes kept drifting to the window, where darkness was gathering early, as it did in late autumn. She was watching the shadows, he realized, the way they crept across their backyard, turning familiar things strange. After dinner, while Rachel cleaned up, James followed Sophie upstairs for bedtime. She was already in bed when he came in, her stuffed elephant clutched tightly to her chest. Want a story tonight? He asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. Sophie shook her head. Can you just stay until I fall asleep? Of course. James smoothed her hair back from her forehead. In the soft glow of her night light, she looked younger than 7, more vulnerable. Sophie, you know you can tell me anything, right? Even if it seems scary or confusing. She was quiet for so long he thought she might have fallen asleep. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, what if nobody believes you? James's heart stuttered. I'll always believe you, Sophie. Always. She turned her face into her pillow, still clutching her elephant. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. Can you check under the bed? And in the closet? James did his usual monster check, making sure to be thorough, even though Sophie hadn't asked for this ritual in months. When he finished, she had her eyes squeezed shut, but he could tell she wasn't sleeping. All clear, he said softly. No monsters anywhere. Sophie opened her eyes, looking at him with an expression that seemed far too old for her face. Sometimes monsters look like regular people, she said, then rolled over, pulling her blanket up to her chin. James sat there in the growing darkness, listening to his daughter's breathing eventually even out into sleep. Downstairs, he could hear Rachel talking on the phone again, probably with Derek, planning Sunday dinner. Her laugh floated up the stairs, familiar and warm, but for the first time, it made him shiver. He thought about Sophie's drawing, tucked away in his desk drawer. The dark sky, the separated figure, the heavy black lines. And now these words about monsters looking like regular people. But when he went downstairs, Rachel was ending another call with Derek, her face glowing with happiness about having her brother back in their lives. She turned to James with a smile that faltered slightly when she saw his expression. What's wrong? I think... James started, then stopped, unsure how to voice his formless concerns. I think something's bothering Sophie. Rachel's face softened with sympathy. James, honey, you're overthinking things again. She's fine. She's just tired. She came over and wrapped her arms around him. You're such a good dad, always worrying about her. But sometimes a quiet day is just a quiet day. James hugged her back, trying to let her certainty calm his fears. But he couldn't shake the image of Sophie's small face in the darkness, or the weight of her words about monsters and people not believing you. Later that night, lying awake long after Rachel had fallen asleep. James listened to the autumn wind rustling through the trees outside. From Sophie's room came the sound of restless movement. She was having trouble sleeping again, as she had been more and more often lately. He got up quietly and went to check on her. She was tangled in her blankets, her face scrunched up in distress. As he gently tucked her back in, she mumbled something that made his blood run cold. "Please don't, Uncle Derek. I don't want to play that game." James stood frozen by her bed, but Sophie had already turned over, her breathing settling back into sleep. He remained there for a long time, watching the shadows move across her wall, trying to convince himself it was just a bad dream. But in his heart, a seed of dread had taken root, and he knew it would not let him rest until he understood what was happening to his little girl. The morning sunlight filled Mrs. Cooper's second-grade classroom as Officer Sarah Martinez stood at the front, her police uniform neatly pressed, her smile warm and reassuring. Sophie sat cross-legged on the reading carpet with her classmates, watching intently as the officer held up colorful pictures. "Remember, kids," Officer Martinez said, "your body belongs to you. If something doesn't feel right, if someone's touch or words make you uncomfortable, that's your body's way of telling you something important." Sophie's hand tightened around her favorite colored pencil, the one she always kept in her pocket. Next to her, Tommy Wilson was making quiet siren noises, but she barely noticed. Her eyes were fixed on the picture Officer Martinez was showing now, a drawing of a child with a thought bubble full of red stop signs. "These are your warning signs," the officer continued. "That funny feeling in your tummy, or when your heart beats really fast, or when you feel like running away. Those are like your body's own special alarm system." Sophie's free hand unconsciously moved to her stomach. She knew about that funny feeling. Came every Sunday now, right before family dinner. And yesterday, when Uncle Derek had come to drop off some books for her mom. "But what if it's someone in your family?" a girl named Lucy asked from the back. "My mom says we have to hug relatives even if we don't want to." Officer Martinez's face grew serious. "That's a very good question, Lucy. Even with family members, you have the right to say no to hugs or touches that make you uncomfortable. Your body, your rules." Sophie felt something loosen in her chest, like a knot she hadn't known was there. She thought about Sunday dinners, about Uncle Derek always wanting her to sit on his lap while he read stories, about the way he'd stroke her hair and call her his special girl. After the presentation, Mrs. Cooper handed out worksheets with pictures of different situations. They were supposed to color them red for unsafe feelings and green for safe feelings. Sophie stared at her paper, the colors swimming before her eyes. "Sophie," Mrs. Cooper's voice was gentle. "Do you need help getting started?" Sophie looked up at her teacher, then back at the worksheet. There was a picture of a child being hugged by an adult. She picked up her red pencil, then put it down again. Uncle Derek's hugs used to feel safe, didn't they? When did they start feeling different? At lunch, Sophie sat with her best friend Emily, but she couldn't focus on Emily's story about her new puppy. Her mind kept going back to Officer Martinez's words about warning signs and body rules. "Sophie," Emily waved a hand in front of her face. "You're being weird again. You've been stirring your soup forever." "Sorry," Sophie mumbled. "I was thinking about the police lady's talk." Emily took a big bite of her sandwich. "My mom says we shouldn't worry about that stuff. Bad things only happen with strangers." Sophie felt that familiar twist in her stomach. "But Officer Martinez said want to trade desserts?" Emily interrupted, already reaching for Sophie's cookie. After school, James was waiting in the pickup line. Sophie climbed into the back seat, clutching her backpack close. "How was school today, sweetheart?" he asked, watching her in the rearview mirror. "We had a police officer visit," Sophie said quietly. "She talked about bodies and rules." James nodded encouragingly. "That sounds like an important lesson. Did you learn anything interesting?" Sophie was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the zipper of her backpack. She said, "We don't have to hug people if we don't want to. Even family." "That's right," James said carefully, noting the way Sophie's shoulders had tensed. "No one should make you do anything that makes you uncomfortable." But Mom says it's rude not to hug Uncle Derek when he comes over. The words tumbled out quickly, like Sophie had been holding them back. She says he'll feel hurt because he missed so many hugs when he was away. James gripped the steering wheel tighter, remembering Sophie's nightmare words from a few nights ago. Sophie, your body belongs to you. If you don't want to hug anyone, that's okay. I'll support you. In the mirror, he saw Sophie's eyes fill with tears. But then everyone gets mad. Mom says I'm being difficult. And Uncle Derek, he says I'm hurting his feelings. That I don't love him anymore. James pulled the car over, his heart pounding. He turned to face his daughter. Sophie, listen to me. You are not being difficult. Your feelings matter. Would you like me to talk to Mom and Uncle Derek about this? Sophie's face crumpled. No, please don't tell them, Uncle Derek said. He said if I tell anyone about our special games, everyone will be angry. That no one will believe me anyway. James felt ice spread through his veins. What special games, Sophie? But Sophie had retreated into herself, curled up small in her seat, tears running down her face. I want to go home, she whispered. Please, can we just go home? James drove the rest of the way in silence, his mind racing. When they got home, Sophie ran straight to her room, leaving her backpack in the car. James picked it up, noticing a paper falling out, the worksheet from the safety presentation. Sophie had colored most of the situations, but the picture of the adult hugging the child was smudged, as if she'd started coloring it multiple times in different colors before giving up. Inside, Rachel was in the kitchen, humming as she checked something in the oven. Derek's joining us for dinner tonight, she called out cheerfully. He said he has a surprise for Sophie. James stood in the doorway, the worksheet clutched in his hand, feeling the weight of his daughter's tears and silence pressing down on him. How could he protect her when the threat seemed to be coming from within their own family? How could he voice his suspicions without destroying the delicate balance of their lives? Upstairs, he could hear Sophie's door closing firmly, another barrier between her and the world that was becoming increasingly frightening. James carefully folded the worksheet and put it in his pocket, next to his heart, where it felt like a burning secret. Linda's pneumonia kept her in the hospital longer than expected, and Derek's presence in their daily lives grew like shadows at dusk, gradual but persistent. He started coming over for dinner more frequently, always with small gifts for Sophie. Art supplies, books, little trinkets that Rachel called thoughtful but made James increasingly uneasy. That Wednesday afternoon, James sat in his office at Millbrook High, unable to focus on grading papers. Mrs. Reynolds had emailed him Sophie's latest artwork from class, a series of pieces that made his stomach churn. The first showed their house at night, dark clouds looming overhead. The second was their family room, where Sunday dinners were held, but all the furniture was drawn in harsh, angular lines. The third, the one that made him close his laptop abruptly, was a self-portrait of Sophie, but she'd colored herself entirely in gray, standing alone in what looked like the corner of their basement. A knock at his door made him jump. Mr. Anderson? Jenny Martinez, one of his AP history students, stood in the doorway. Can I ask you something about the Civil War essay? James tried to focus on Jenny's questions about citation formats, but his mind kept drifting to Sophie. That morning, she'd begged to stay home from school, complaining of a stomach ache. Rachel had dismissed it as attention-seeking, especially after Derek had offered to come by and cheer her up. Sophie just needs to learn she can't get her way by acting up, Rachel had said, her voice carrying that edge it got whenever James expressed concern about her brother. Derek's trying so hard with her. His phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. Derek's picking up Sophie from art class today. I have a late meeting and he offered. Isn't he sweet? James's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He thought about Sophie's gray self-portrait, about the way she'd started sleeping with her lights on, about how she flinched when Derek tried to hug her last Sunday. I can pick her up, he typed back. My last class was canceled. Already arranged, Rachel replied. Don't worry. James stood up so abruptly that Jenny stepped back in surprise. Class dismissed, he said, gathering his things. We'll continue this tomorrow. He drove to Millbrook Elementary faster than he should have, arriving just as the art class was ending. Through the window, he could see Sophie at her desk, hunched over a drawing. Mrs. Reynolds stood nearby, her face concerned. As he watched, Derek appeared at the classroom door, his tall frame filling the space. Sophie's shoulders tensed visibly, her hand gripping her pencil so hard James could almost see it shaking from where he stood. Mrs. Reynolds said something to Derek, gesturing to a visitor's pass. While Derek turned to write his name, James slipped into the building, his heart pounding. The sound of his dress shoes on the linoleum made Sophie look up. The relief on her face was immediate and devastating. "Daddy!" She ran to him, colliding with his legs hard enough to make him stumble. Derek turned, his friendly smile faltering for just a moment before recovering. "James, didn't expect to see you here. Rachel said you had classes. Last one was canceled," James said, his arm around Sophie's trembling shoulders. "Thought I'd surprise my girl." Mrs. Reynolds watched this interaction carefully, her eyes moving between Sophie's tight grip on her father's coat and Derek's carefully maintained smile. "Well, since you're here," Derek said easily, "why don't we all go get ice cream? Make it a guy's day out with my favorite niece." Sophie's fingers dug into James's side. "Actually," James said, "Sophie has a dentist appointment. Must have slipped Rachel's mind when she texted you." It was a lie, but something in Mrs. Reynolds' expression told him she understood. "Some other time then," Derek said, his tone light but his eyes hard. "See you Sunday, Sophie girl." Sophie didn't respond, her face pressed into James's coat. After Derek left, Mrs. Reynolds approached them, holding Sophie's latest drawing. "Mr. Anderson, could we speak for a moment?" Sophie looked up, panic flashing across her face. "It's okay, sweetheart," James soothed. "Why don't you pack up your art supplies? I'll be right here." Mrs. Reynolds led him a few steps away, unfolding the drawing. It showed a small figure Sophie, surrounded by looming shadows that seemed to have hands reaching toward her. In the corner, barely visible, was a larger figure turned away, colored in what looked like James's usual brown coat. "Sophie's art has been concerning lately," Mrs. Reynolds said quietly. "The themes are getting darker, and she's been using a lot of imagery that, in my experience, can indicate—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Has Sophie talked to you about anything that's bothering her?" James stared at the drawing, at the figure in his coat turned away while shadows reached for his daughter. "She's been having trouble sleeping," he said, "and she's been quieter. But whenever I ask, she just closes up." Mrs. Reynolds nodded. "That's common when children are struggling with something they don't have words for." The weight of what she wasn't saying hung between them. "Mr. Anderson," Mrs. Reynolds continued, even softer now, "I've been teaching for 15 years. Sometimes, children tell us things through their art that they're afraid to say out loud. And sometimes, the people closest to them have trouble seeing what's right in front of them because the truth is too unthinkable," James finished, his voice hoarse. Sophie appeared at his side, her art supplies packed away, her small hand seeking his. Mrs. Reynolds gave him a long look that said more than words could. "Thank you," James said, taking the drawing, "for paying attention." In the car, Sophie was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, almost peaceful, as if just having James there was enough to make her feel safe. He watched her in the rearview mirror, this precious child he'd sworn to protect, and felt something crystallize in his chest. The shadows were closing in, but he wouldn't let them take his daughter. Not while he could still stand between her and the darkness. The day that everything changed started like any other. Sophie sat in art class, working on what Mrs. Reynolds had called a free expression piece. Her colored pencils were lined up precisely on her desk: blue, black, red, and gray, the colors she used most often now. "Sophie," Mrs. Reynolds said softly, appearing beside her desk. "Your uncle is here to pick you up." Sophie's hand froze mid-stroke, the black pencil pressing too hard against the paper. Through the classroom door's window, she could see Uncle Derek signing in at the front desk, his familiar green jacket making her stomach twist into knots. "I want to wait for Daddy," Sophie whispered, though she knew it wasn't Wednesday. Daddy always came on Wednesdays. Mrs. Reynolds knelt beside her desk. "Sweetheart, the office said your mom arranged for your uncle to take you home today. Because of Aunt Linda's condition." Sophie began packing her pencils away, her hands shaking so badly that she dropped the red one. It rolled under her desk, but she couldn't make herself reach for it. "I don't want to go," she said, her voice so quiet it was barely audible. Mrs. Reynolds tilted her head, studying Sophie's face. "Sophie, is there something you want to tell me?" Sophie thought about Officer Martinez's talk, about body rules and warning signs. She thought about the games Uncle Derek wanted to play when no one else was around, about his special secrets that made her feel sick and scared. Sophie started, then stopped as Uncle Derek's words echoed in her head. "No one will believe you anyway. You'll just make everyone sad and angry." The classroom door opened. "There's my favorite artist." Uncle Derek's voice boomed across the room, making Sophie flinch. "Ready to go? I thought we could stop for a treat on the way home." Sophie looked at Mrs. Reynolds, then at her half-finished drawing, a maze of dark corridors with no exit. "I don't want to," she said again, louder this time. "Sophie," Derek's voice took on that edge she'd grown to fear, though his smile remained fixed. "Don't be difficult. Your mom asked me to pick you up." "Mr. Anderson," Mrs. Reynolds stood up, positioning herself slightly between Sophie and Derek. "I don't mean to overstep, but Sophie seems uncomfortable. Perhaps we should call her parents to confirm." "That won't be necessary," Derek said smoothly. "Rachel, my sister, already cleared this with the office. Sophie's just being shy today. Aren't you, sweetheart?" He reached for Sophie's backpack, but she grabbed it first, clutching it to her chest like a shield. "No," she said, and this time her voice was firm. "I won't go with you." The silence that followed was heavy. Derek's smile slipped for just a moment, revealing something that made Sophie shrink back in her chair. "Sophie," he said, his voice honey-sweet but his eyes hard, "you're making a scene. We don't want that, do we? Remember our special talks about being a good girl?" Mrs. Reynolds moved to her desk, picking up her phone. "I think I should call Mr. Anderson." "That's really not Derek started. But Sophie cut him off with something that surprised even her. "I said no." The words burst out of her, loud and clear. "I don't want to go with you. I don't want to play your games. I want my daddy." Other students were staring now. Mrs. Reynolds was already dialing, her eyes never leaving Derek's face. And Derek, Uncle Derek, who always seemed so big and scary, suddenly looked small and uncertain. "Sophie's clearly distressed," Mrs. Reynolds said firmly. "I'm calling her father." Derek backed toward the door, his friendly mask cracking. "This is ridiculous. Rachel will hear about this." After he left, Sophie started shaking so hard her teeth chattered. Mrs. Reynolds wrapped her in a soft blanket they kept in the reading corner, speaking quietly into her phone. "Mr. Anderson? This is Mrs. Reynolds from Millbrook Elementary. There's been a situation with Sophie." "Yes." "No, she's safe, but I think you should come right away." Sophie hugged her backpack, feeling the weight of what she'd done settle over her. She'd said no. She'd actually said no, just like Officer Martinez had taught them. But now everyone would be angry. Mom would be upset. Aunt Linda would cry. And Uncle Derek. "Sophie," Mrs. Reynolds was kneeling beside her again. "Your daddy's on his way. You were very brave just now. Do you understand that? Very, very brave." Sophie nodded, but she couldn't stop shaking. She'd broken the biggest rule. She'd refused Uncle Derek. Had almost told about their special secret. What would happen now? "Can you tell me why you didn't want to go with your uncle?" Mrs. Reynolds asked gently. Sophie looked at her teacher's kind face, then at her unfinished drawing with its dark corridors. She thought about all the things she wanted to say, about the knot of fear that lived in her stomach now, about how Uncle Derek's games made her feel dirty and scared. But the words wouldn't come. Not yet. Instead, she just whispered, "He's not safe." Mrs. Reynolds nodded as if those 3 words told her everything she needed to know. Maybe they did. They sat together in silence until James arrived, out of breath and wild-eyed. When Sophie saw him in the doorway, something inside her broke. She ran to him, sobbing, all her carefully held together pieces finally falling apart. "Daddy," she cried into his shirt. "I said no. I said no like the police lady taught us." James held her close, his heart pounding against her ear. "You did exactly right, Sophie. Exactly right." Over her head, he met Mrs. Reynolds' grave expression, and in that moment, all his suspicions, all his fears, began to crystallize into a terrible certainty. The storm was about to break. The drive home from Millbrook Elementary was silent, heavy with unspoken words. James kept glancing at Sophie in the rearview mirror, watching her stare out the window, her small hands still trembling slightly. His phone had been buzzing continuously. Missed calls from Rachel, text messages from Derek trying to explain the misunderstanding. He turned it off. When they pulled into their driveway, Rachel was already there, pacing on the front porch. Sophie tensed in her seat. "Can we not go in?" she whispered. "Please, Daddy." "We have to, sweetheart," James said gently. "But I'm right here. I won't leave you alone." Rachel rushed to the car as they got out. "What is wrong with you, James?" "Derek called me completely upset. He said you had the school accuse him of. She couldn't even finish the sentence. "Not here," James said firmly, noting how Sophie pressed against his leg. Inside, once in the house, Sophie tried to run upstairs, but Rachel caught her arm. "Young lady, you need to explain why you treated your uncle that way." "Rachel," James's voice held a warning. "Let her go." "No, this has gone on long enough. Your paranoia is infecting our daughter, James. Derek is family. I don't want to play his games anymore." Sophie burst out, tears streaming down her face. "I don't want his special secrets." Rachel's face went white. "What are you talking about? Sophie, what games?" But Sophie broke free and ran upstairs, the sound of her door slamming echoing through the house. James moved to follow her, but Rachel grabbed his arm. "What have you been putting in her head?" she demanded. "Derek would never. He's her uncle. He loves her." "Does he?" James's voice was deadly quiet. "Then why did our daughter scream in terror rather than go with him today? Why has she been having nightmares? Why does every drawing she makes lately look like a cry for help? She's just acting out. Kids do that." But there was a tremor in Rachel's voice. "Derek had some troubles when he was younger, but he got help. He changed." James stared at his wife. "What troubles, Rachel? What aren't you telling me?" Rachel's face crumpled. "It was nothing. Just some rumors about him and our cousin's daughter. But they were never proven. The family handled it internally." "The family handled it?" James felt sick. "Like you're trying to handle this now? You don't understand," Rachel's voice broke. "Our family, we don't air our dirty laundry. We protect each other." "Protect each other?" James roared, making Rachel step back. "What about protecting Sophie?" Upstairs, they could hear Sophie crying. James lowered his voice, but his words were no less intense. "Our daughter is terrified, Rachel. She's 7 years old and she's carrying around special secrets that make her shake with fear. And you're worried about protecting your brother? You don't know what it would do to this family if these accusations got out," Rachel pleaded. "Derek's marriage, his job at the youth center the youth center?" James felt the room spin. "He works with children?" A knock at the door made them both freeze. Through the front window, they could see Derek standing on the porch. "No," James said as Rachel moved toward the door. "He's not coming in this house. He's my brother, James. We need to talk this through as a family." "As a family?" James laughed bitterly. "Like your family talked through what happened with your cousin's daughter?" Rachel's hand froze on the doorknob. For the first time, real doubt crept into her eyes. "Mom," Sophie's small voice came from the top of the stairs. "Please don't let him in. Please." Rachel looked at her daughter, really looked at her, and something seemed to break inside her. She stepped back from the door. "Go away, Derek," she called out, her voice shaking. "Not tonight." They could hear Derek's voice through the door, still maintaining that friendly tone that now seemed so sinister. "Come on, Rach. You know Sophie's just confused." "Let me explain, I said go away." Rachel screamed, surprising them all. There was silence from the porch, then the sound of footsteps leaving. Rachel slid down the wall, tears streaming down her face. "Oh God," she whispered. "Oh God, what have I done? What did I let him?" James was already halfway up the stairs to Sophie, who stood trembling in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed elephant. "Daddy," she asked in a small voice, "is it over?" James gathered her in his arms, feeling her heart racing against his chest. "Almost, sweetheart. There's just one more thing I have to do." He carried her to her room, where Rachel stood in the doorway, her face streaked with tears. "Stay with her," he told his wife. "Don't let her out of your sight." "Where are you going?" Rachel asked, though her eyes said she already knew. James picked up his phone, turning it back on. "I'm calling the police. It ends tonight." As he dialed 911, he could hear Rachel talking softly to Sophie, their daughter's sobs finally giving way to exhausted whimpers. The dispatcher's voice came on the line, calm and professional. 911, what's your emergency?" James took a deep breath, thinking of all the signs he'd seen, all the warnings he'd tried to dismiss. "Never again. I need to report a child predator," he said firmly. "And I have reason to believe there may be other victims." Detective Sarah Martinez, the same officer who had given the safety presentation at Sophie's school, sat across from them in the police station's family room. The space was designed to be comforting, with soft colors and comfortable furniture, but nothing could ease the tension that filled the air. Sophie sat between her parents on a plush couch, her favorite elephant clutched tightly to her chest. She hadn't spoken since they'd arrived, but her grip on James's hand hadn't loosened. "Sophie," Detective Martinez said gently, "do you remember me from your class?" A small nod. "You were very brave today, saying no when you felt unsafe. Can you tell me about that?" Sophie looked up at James, then at Rachel, who had barely stopped crying since they'd left the house. "It's okay, baby," Rachel whispered. "We're here. Uncle Derek." Sophie's voice was barely audible. "He has special games. Secret games." Detective Martinez kept her voice calm and steady. "Can you tell me about these games?" As Sophie began to speak, hesitantly at first, then in a rush of words that seemed to tumble over each other, James felt Rachel's hand grip his arm with bruising force. The details their daughter shared, about touches that made her uncomfortable, about being told to keep secrets, about threats wrapped in sweet words, made him want to be sick. "You did nothing wrong," Detective Martinez assured Sophie when she finally fell silent. "Nothing at all. These games, they're not your fault." "But everyone's sad now," Sophie whispered, "just like he said they'd be." "We're not sad because of you," James said firmly. "We're sad because someone we trusted hurt you." Detective Martinez nodded encouragingly, then turned to Rachel. "Mrs. Anderson, you mentioned earlier that there had been previous incidents?" Rachel's face crumpled. "I was 13 when my cousin Emily told me about Derek doing similar things to her. But our parents said she was lying, seeking attention. They sent her to live with other relatives. I never saw her again." "Do you know where Emily is now?" "No," Rachel whispered. "Our family, we don't talk about her. About any of it. There's more." Detective Martinez's pen paused on her notepad. Rachel nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Over the years there were rumors. A neighbor's daughter, a girl at his college. But each time our parents would handle it quietly. Move him to a new school, a new town. They said he was troubled, that he just needed help. And his current job at the youth center? Oh God." Rachel pressed her hands to her mouth. "The children there." Detective Martinez spoke into her radio, dispatching officers to the youth center immediately. Then she turned back to Sophie. "Sophie, I have one more important question. Did your uncle ever take pictures during these games?" Sophie nodded slowly. "On his phone. He said they were our special memories." James had to leave the room then, making it to the bathroom just in time to be violently sick. When he returned, Detective Martinez was showing Sophie a collection of stuffed animals, letting her choose one to take home. "We'll need to do a more formal interview," she told James and Rachel quietly while Sophie examined the toys. But right now, there's something you need to see. She led them to her office, where her computer displayed a police database. Derek Anderson has a sealed juvenile record in Ohio. 2 accusations of molestation, no convictions. He moved to Pennsylvania after that. Another accusation. Charges dropped when the family wouldn't cooperate. Then Maryland, Virginia, and finally back here. He's been doing this for decades, James said numbly, moving from place to place. And every time the families chose silence, Detective Martinez confirmed. Until today, Rachel made a sound like a wounded animal. I knew. Deep down, I knew. But he was my brother, and our parents always said, "It's a common pattern in families," Detective Martinez said gently. The desire to protect, to keep things private. But that protection often goes to the wrong person. They returned to the family room, where Sophie had fallen asleep on the couch, clutching both her elephant and a new stuffed penguin. "We'll arrest him tonight," Detective Martinez assured them. And this time, with Sophie's testimony and the evidence on his phone. He won't be able to just move away and start over. As James carried his sleeping daughter to the car, he felt the weight of what lay ahead. The interviews, the trial, the long road of healing. But Sophie had shown more courage than any adult in her life, finally breaking a cycle of silence that had protected a predator for generations. In the back seat, Sophie stirred slightly. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart. Is Uncle Derek going away?" "Yes," James said firmly. "For a very long time." "Good," Sophie whispered, drifting back to sleep. "I don't want to keep secrets anymore." Rachel reached back and took her daughter's hand, her voice thick with tears and determination. "No more secrets," she promised. "Never again." The days following Derek's arrest shattered their world into before and after. Linda, still weak from pneumonia, had to be sedated when she learned the truth about her husband. Rachel's parents arrived from Connecticut, bringing with them their well-practiced tools of denial and minimization. "Surely there's been some mistake," Rachel's mother insisted over tea in their kitchen, while Sophie played upstairs in her room, never alone now, always with either James or Rachel nearby. "Derek's always been sensitive. Misunderstood. Like Emily was misunderstood?" Rachel's voice held a new edge, sharp and unforgiving. "Like all the others we ignored?" "That was different," her father interjected. "We handled those situations, you handled nothing." Rachel slammed her hands on the table, making the cups rattle. "You just moved him around, gave him new hunting grounds. And I let Sophie." Her voice broke. "I let my own daughter become his prey because I was too cowardly to face the truth." Upstairs, James sat outside Sophie's room, listening to her talk with her new therapist, Dr. Sarah. They'd found someone who specialized in child trauma, who knew how to help young children process experiences they should never have had to face. "Can I show you my new drawing?" Sophie's voice drifted through the partially open door. There was a rustling of paper. "This is beautiful, Sophie," Dr. Sarah said warmly. "The sky is so much brighter than in your other pictures." "Daddy says the dark things can't hurt me anymore," Sophie explained. "And Mom doesn't make me hug anyone I don't want to now." James closed his eyes, feeling tears threaten. They'd all failed her so badly, and yet she still found ways to heal, to trust, to move forward. The sound of raised voices from downstairs grew louder. Rachel's parents were leaving or being asked to leave, from the tone of it. "You're destroying this family." Her mother's voice carried up the stairs. "Think of Linda, of Derek's reputation, Get out." Rachel's voice was cold, final. "If you ever try to contact Sophie, if you ever try to minimize what he did again, I'll make sure everyone knows how you protected him all these years." The front door slammed. In Sophie's room, the conversation with Dr. Sarah continued, calm and steady, creating a safe space where a little girl could begin to understand that none of this had been her fault. James's phone buzzed. A text from Detective Martinez. More victims coming forward. 3 girls from the youth center. 2 former neighbors. "Emily finally returned our call." He typed back, "How many?" "Still counting." Decades of silence breaking open. Rachel appeared at the top of the stairs, her face tear-stained but resolute. She sat down next to James, reading the texts over his shoulder. I found Emily, she said quietly. On Facebook. She's in Oregon now. She said she's proud of Sophie. For being braver than any of us were. From Sophie's room came the sound of gentle laughter, real laughter. Something they hadn't heard in too long. Dr. Sarah was teaching her a game about boundaries, about safe touches versus unsafe ones, using stuffed animals to demonstrate. The preliminary hearing is next week, James said softly. They want Sophie to testify. Rachel tensed. She's just a baby. She's stronger than we know, James replied. But she doesn't have to do it alone. Not anymore. They sat together, shoulder to shoulder, listening to their daughter's voice growing stronger, more confident, as she worked through her trauma with Dr. Sarah. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows, but they weren't as frightening now. Sophie was learning that shadows couldn't hurt her, only the people who hid within them could do that. And she wasn't hiding anymore. The courtroom was designed to be less intimidating for child witnesses, but it still felt overwhelming. Sophie sat in a special room with a video link, clutching her stuffed elephant, while Dr. Sarah sat beside her. On the screen, she could see the judge, the lawyers, and in the corner, James and Rachel holding hands so tightly their knuckles were white. Uncle Derek was there too, but the camera was positioned so Sophie wouldn't have to see him. Sophie, the prosecutor said gently, can you tell us about the day you said no at school? Sophie looked at Dr. Sarah, who nodded encouragingly. Then at the screen where her parents sat, her mother's face tear-stained but proud, her father's eyes never leaving her. I didn't want to go with him, Sophie said, her voice small but clear. Mrs. Reynolds taught us about colors in art class, how some make you feel safe and some don't. Uncle Derek, he made everything feel dark. As Sophie continued to speak, other voices joined hers. Emily, now a mother herself, testified via video link from Oregon. 3 girls from the youth center, each carrying their own stuffed animals, shared stories that echoed Sophie's. Linda, still looking frail, spoke about finding disturbing images on Derek's phone. But it was Rachel's testimony that shifted something in the courtroom's atmosphere. We protected the wrong person, she said, looking directly at her brother for the first time since his arrest. We chose silence over safety, denial over truth. I watched my daughter draw her fear in black and gray, and still I tried to convince myself everything was fine. But Sophie, Rachel's voice broke, then strengthened. Sophie showed more courage than all of us. She drew a line. She said no. And in doing so, she saved not just herself, but others who might have been next. The trial lasted 4 days. Derek's lawyer tried to paint the incidents as misunderstandings, the families as overreacting. But there were too many voices now, too many stories that could no longer be buried under family secrets and forced smiles. When the verdict came, guilty on all counts, Sophie was in her art therapy session, painting with bright yellows and blues. What are you drawing? Dr. Sarah asked. The sun, Sophie said, adding orange streaks. Mom says Emily is coming to visit next month. She has a daughter my age. Can I show her my art room? That evening, they had a different kind of family dinner. Emily and her family had sent a video message, and Linda joined them, slowly learning to build a life without the man she thought she knew. Rachel's parents had sent a letter, but it remained unopened on the mantel. Healing would come in its own time, if at all. I have something for you, James said to Sophie after dinner, pulling out a new set of professional colored pencils. Mrs. Reynolds says you're ready for these. Sophie ran her fingers over the pencils, arranging them in rainbow order. Not just blacks and grays anymore, but every color imaginable. Can I draw our family? She asked. Of course, sweetheart. They watched as she worked, her small face serious with concentration. When she finished, she held up the picture. It showed their house, but this time with a bright blue sky. In front were 3 figures, Sophie, James, and Rachel, surrounded by a golden light that seemed to protect them. No shadows, no separated figures, no dark corners, just family, redefined and stronger for having faced the truth together. Would you like me to continue with the final chapter? 1 year later, Sophie stood in the Millbrook Elementary School art gallery, surrounded by drawings and paintings from students across the district. Her piece hung in the center, a triptych that Mrs. Reynolds had helped her frame especially for the exhibition. The first panel showed a house at night, shadows creeping in from all sides. The second depicted a small figure standing tall, saying "N.O." in bold red letters. The third, the one that always made James's throat tight, showed a family bathed in sunrise, the shadows retreating. "You did it, Sophie," Emily said softly, standing beside her niece. She had moved her family back east, just an hour away, breaking decades of enforced distance. Her daughter, Maya, was now Sophie's constant companion, the two girls sharing a bond their mothers never had the chance to forge. Linda stood on Sophie's other side, her hand resting gently on the girl's shoulder. The past year had been hard for her, but she'd found strength in supporting the victims' families, in turning her pain into purpose. "Mrs. Reynolds says my art is helping other kids," Sophie said, watching a group of students gather around her display. "She uses it in her safety classes now." Rachel, who had been speaking with Detective Martinez nearby, joined them. The two women had formed an unexpected alliance, working together to create new child safety programs in schools across the state. Rachel's testimony at Derek's trial had inspired other families to break their own cycles of silence. "The superintendent wants to display your work at other schools," Rachel told Sophie. "Would that be okay?" Sophie considered this, twirling one of her colored pencils. She always kept at least one in her pocket, but now they were bright colors, not just the dark ones. "Will it help other kids be brave?" she asked. "I think it already has," James said, joining his family. He nodded toward a small group of children and parents talking with Dr. Sarah near the refreshment table. They were from the youth center families who had come forward after Sophie's testimony, finding their own voices. Detective Martinez had told them yesterday that Derek's case had opened investigations in 3 other states. More survivors were speaking up, more families choosing truth over silence. The ripples of one child's courage continued to spread. "Sophie," Maya called from across the room. "Come see what Mrs. Reynolds is showing us." Sophie looked up at her parents, getting their nod of approval before joining her cousin. The two girls huddled with their art teacher, who was demonstrating a new painting technique, something with lots of bright colors. "She's really healing, isn't she?" Linda said softly, watching Sophie laugh at something Maya whispered. "We all are," Rachel replied, squeezing Linda's hand. James watched his daughter, remembering the frightened child who once colored herself in gray. Now she was helping create a mural for the school's entrance, a bright sunrise with the words, "Your voice matters," painted in rainbow colors. "Mr. and Mrs. Anderson?" A woman approached them hesitantly. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but my daughter just started attending therapy because of Sophie's art. When she saw that first panel, she finally found a way to tell us what was happening at her uncle's house. I just wanted to say thank you." Rachel hugged the woman without hesitation, both of them crying and laughing at once. Around them, the art gallery buzzed with life and conversation, as more families shared their stories, finding strength in breaking the silence together. Sophie's voice rang out clear and happy, explaining her artwork to a group of students. "See, the shadows look scary," she was saying, "but they can't hurt you if you're brave enough to tell. And there are always people who will believe you and help you find the light again." James felt Rachel's hand slip into his as they watched their daughter, no longer a victim, but a survivor whose courage had lit a path for others to follow. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant colors. But inside, in this space filled with art and truth and healing, there were no shadows left to fear. Just the warm light of family redefined, of silence broken, of love that grew stronger for having faced the darkness and chosen to shine anyway. Sophie looked back at her parents and smiled, a real smile, bright as the colors she now used to tell her story. And in that smile was everything they had fought for: safety, truth, and the unshakable knowledge that her voice, once found, could never be silenced again.